Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week is another episode of Science But Simple. For those who are just joining us, Science But Simple is basically a mini-series that myself and my mate Josh do. Josh has a degree in marine biology, so he knows about all that sort of stuff, and I don't, quite frankly. The first Science But Simple was the 6th episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. It was how light bulbs work and a general understanding of energy. And the second episode of Science But Simple was actually the 12th episode of Genuine Chit Chat, and it was about tides, gravity, and the moon, and how that all sort of works. This mini-series is just about learning science that we kind of have in our everyday lives, really, that we notice or that we interact with, that sort of thing, and just explaining it in an easy-to-digest manner. And if you're into this episode, last week I spoke with another friend of mine who's got a degree called Wayne, and he's actually got a degree in paleontology, which is basically life on Earth since the dawn of time up till essentially history. We talk about fossils, dinosaurs, mass extinction events, giant insects, all kinds of crazy stuff. So that's definitely one to check out as well. And in this episode of Science But Simple, we're talking about misconceptions, and Josh is debunking a couple of these. There are only 3 in this episode, and we speak about potentially doing more episodes in the future about misconceptions, and some of them can be small, some of them can be big. If anyone has any ones that they'd like us to shout about, then contact us at Genuine Chit Chat on Twitter, on Instagram, Facebook. You can email us. All the details are in the links in the podcast description, or if you're listening on YouTube, in the YouTube description. So this week we speak about GMOs, which is genetically modified organisms. When people talk about GMO food, basically, we explain what that actually is and why it's nothing to be worried about. We talk about sort of big pharma and the pharmaceutical companies, and how sort of drugs get put through, or medicine gets put through and sold to the general public. And we talk about it in Britain, and which is obviously where we're from, and also a bit in America. So we talk about that, and we also talk about cancer and sort of radiotherapy, chemotherapy, and how cancer sort of works, and why there's not like one big miracle cure for all cancer and things like that. So obviously we do talk about cancer. I speak about it a little bit with Josh about my dad, because my dad passed away from cancer quite a few years ago now. I think it's about 5 years ago. But we don't get into like really deep. This isn't about that. It's just about the scientific side of things. But if speaking about cancer does make you feel uncomfortable or anything like that, then just to warn you, we start talking about cancer quite near the start. I think we talk about a few other things for the first 5-10 minutes of the episode, and then we kind of get into the misconceptions. So just a pre-warning, if that's a sensitive subject for you, well, either skip it or don't listen to it. It's not a problem at all. Anyway, guys, thanks as always for listening. I'll be back at the end for the usual ways of getting hold of us, what's coming up, and that sort of jazz. Yeah, I guess I'll get the show started. Welcome to Genuine Chit Chat, where we have honest conversations with interesting people. And I'm your host, Mike Burton.
It's like, well, the last one, I was like, this time it's just me.
That's it. That's exactly what we're going to be doing. Anyway. Hello guys, I started recording before Josh was ready. Got you there again.
Just so funny.
I'm so hilarious all the time. That's the problem. The podcast doesn't encapsulate how funny I am all the time. Hello guys, I'm here once again with Josh. I think now you're officially the person who's been on the podcast the most, because I think Tom was on 2 of them, so you already beat him when you're on the 3rd one. But obviously we've got a mini-series together, so it's going to...
This is my podcast now.
Just slowly take it over. Just come up and just take over it. Everyone just starts, like, as I get more and more people subscribing and more people getting into the podcast, more people are like, I actually really like Josh a lot more than I like Mike. Like, can we have Josh just doing his Science But Simple, but without Mike, and just have Josh interviewing and talking to everyone Mike talks to instead?
To be honest, if I could be bothered and had the drive for it, you could probably make an entire podcast about this series in particular.
Oh yeah, it wouldn't be difficult to do at all.
No.
Maybe if my podcast gets enough traction and stuff, I'll start up a podcast network, and then you can be on it, and then the Science But Simple will be its own thing.
I think you underestimate how much work being a teacher is going to be.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it wouldn't be. It could just be like it would be like a series based thing, because like there's a lot of podcasts where actually they do series. So like the Say Why to Drugs is one, which is Dr. Susie Gage, and she does like 5 or 10 episodes at a time, and then just says, okay, these next 10 weeks release one a week, and then a few months down the line we'll release some more, and blah 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 blah. Anyway, guys, there's another Science But Simple, as I said. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, it should be fairly obvious what these are. It's just we like to talk about things to do with science, because Josh has a degree in marine biology and knows about science and stuff, and I'm a moron, so it's quite good for him to try and explain things to me, and then if I understand them, chances are other people will too. The last ones we did were we did gravity, the moon, how tides work, and light and heat from the sun, and the first one we did was about
energy from generation to
turning on your how light bulbs work generally. Yeah, so they're the 2 episodes we've done so far. In the future, we're thinking about doing metabolism, eating, human biology, potentially gadgets. There's an episode of the podcast which will be out by now with my friend Wayne, and he's a paleontologist, and we spoke about paleontology and dinosaurs and prehistoric things, and we're going to have him on the podcast at some point with Josh, and we'll do like a talking about our favourite creatures and crazy creatures, that sort of thing, and that'll be under the Science But Simple banner probably. I haven't figured that out yet, but in this episode, get down to it, it's going to be about misconceptions, because this is one actually Josh wanted to do. I really didn't. I hate Josh, and I didn't really want to do this at all, but he made such a fuss about it that I'm joking. Josh is giving me such an unimpressed look, but misconception. I think there's a few misconceptions specifically that Josh has got to mind that he wants to talk about. So if you want to fire off.
Yeah, the big thing about this is a lot of the time you see it, especially on social media, people kind of like making comments about that. And you can have an opinion, that's fine, but don't start spouting off exposition and facts like you know what you're talking about. I don't entirely know these subjects, but I know enough to say that when I see certain things, to call bullshit on it, pretty much.
Yeah.
And it just, people spreading exposition and not necessarily false information, but information without evidence. It triggered me a little bit.
Well, you're an intelligent guy, and spreading of misinformation was a trigger. I mean, it happens with me in a lot of ways for things as well. I don't have it in the exact same way you do, but I just find like as I've gotten older, I find it so hard not to correct people with certain things. There's small things of grammar when people say bought instead of brought and vice versa, and I just don't say that anymore because there's just no point. But when it's like someone says something that's clearly wrong, it's just like it's like sometimes you just got to let it go, but other times it's just like, no, actually you're wrong.
You gotta make the judgment call of when you like actually personally say stuff like that to people, because there's some people that say, oh yeah, right, and they'll go back and say, yeah, correct that,
yeah,
redo. And some people are like, how dare you question me, like take it as a personal offense, which is like, no, because like you've said I'd be appreciative if I said something wrong and someone corrected me. I've improved as a person to know that thing.
Exactly.
And like other people take offense to me saying, well, I mean, correcting a false piece of information or a false use of something, and then that is improving for you. So like,
that's it. It's one of those things where basically when you have a discussion with someone, if you say something that isn't an opinion, that is should be a fact, one of two things is going to happen. Either it's correct, and that's fine, or you're wrong. And if you're wrong, someone will tell you that you're wrong, and then you're right anyway. So it's almost like a win-win. It's just like people shouldn't take to heart being critiqued, or like it's not a personal attack.
Criticism for criticism's sake, and then there's what we'd call constructive criticism, which is saying this isn't quite right. That's how I'd make it right. There you go. We all move up from here.
Yeah, and that's exactly what this podcast is going to be themed around. Is if anyone had these misconceptions, I've probably got them all, to be honest with you. But it's not an attack on anyone's intelligence. We don't want anyone here. Science But Simple is meant to be just anyone who's interested in science, just get into it. It doesn't matter what you thought you knew or anything like that. Just come along for the ride. If you learn some new stuff, that's cool. You know, also feel free to research it. I mean, if anyone looks up anything and they think that anything isn't quite aligned, you can contact us, contact us on, Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, or email at genuinechitchat@outlook.com, and that will be in links in the description and stuff. But let's fire away. So what's the first sort of misconception you want to bring up?
So the first thing I would like to discuss is something that I think you had to a higher degree than I do have personal experience with,
Right.
and that would be cancer, something that more or less everybody is going to come across in some point in their life.
Well, statistically, I was listening to what's the name of the person who studies cancer, entomologist or something like that.
I was going to talk about that later, but oncologist.
Oncologist, that's the word.
Oncology is the study of cancer.
There you go. Because there's a podcast I listened to with the neuroscientist Sam Harris, and he had an oncologist on, and he was talking about, like, statistically speaking, I think it's 1 in 2 males in the Western world are likely to get cancer, and 1 in 3 females are likely to get cancer. And in the previous podcast, I've lightly touched about the subject, is that my dad died of cancer when I was 19. I'm 24 now. Oh Christ, I'm 24 and it was my birthday last week.
That's a long time ago.
It's five years ago, he passed away. He was ill with it for about a year and a half. He got diagnosed about a year and a half. He passed away. I talk about it like in podcasts when people bring it up. I'm not closed off to the idea, but at some point in the future, I'm thinking with one of my brothers, I'm going to do like a full podcast just talking about it, and I think it might be able to help quite a few people who have been sort of had similar experiences. But we won't delve into that sort of horrendously deep stuff. This isn't going to be about that.
This is more about
objective
science.
science.
The title is the objective side of it rather than the emotional and support side of it. Although we're all people, that's important.
Yeah, precisely. But I'm not. I'll clarify to yourself and to everyone else that I'm not one, as obviously you know because you know me for many years. I'm open about this sort of thing. I'm happy to talk about any of it. It doesn't. It's not. Some people will get triggered in the way that they will get upset by it. So obviously. That is a mild warning. If you don't like hearing about cancer or anything, this may upset you a little bit. But we're just talking about objectively. We're not going into the horrendously deep details. So with cancer, then, what misconceptions are there?
So I'd probably like to just go through this step by step.
Yep.
And first off, I just ask, what do you understand currently, or think you understand about the way that cancer works, or what it actually is?
I think it's. From what I recall, it's basically like cells that either can't stop splitting and multiplying, essentially, and then they can't ever stop, and then it becomes like a tumor, essentially, or it's also when your body's got like that. No, the cells have got this thing in it where it's kind of like a kill switch, where they're meant to kill themselves, essentially, and that can kind of spread to the wrong cells, kind of. That's my vague idea of it.
The first one would be correct. The second one you're describing is something called cell apoptosis.
Right.
Which is basically organised and programmed cell suicide.
Yeah.
Generally, if something severe goes wrong in a cell, it's like, this isn't right, and it commands itself to basically self-destruct.
Right, yeah.
As like a defense mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
The issue with cancer is that it is a tumour, is, to simply put it, an uncontrolled growth of cells. By them, they reproduce, they divide, and they split and multiply. You then get, I'm sure most people understand that a benign tumour is one that grows until a certain point and then stops. A malignant one will continue to grow and multiply. It can break off and spread to different parts of the body.
They're the most dangerous ones. Yes. Often, some people can have cancers that, or a tumour rather, which when it's benign, it's you get it. It can be bad, but they sometimes don't even have to remove it. They can just be like, it's fine.
There's more risk of doing something if we go in and get it out than it is if we just leave it as it is, because it's not. Keep an eye on it, but it's not growing. It's not posing any more risk. Just leave it be.
Yeah. Okay.
But to go all the way back to this cancer, the idea of cancer revolves around what's called the cell cycle, which is the process by which your cells duplicate their DNA, pull it to two sides, split down the middle, and form into two cells, which is, you have the parent cell and what's called two daughter cells. And it is the things that control the cell division are genes. So much like you have, say, muscle cells and skin cells and nerve cells and bone cells, each of these cells is expressing different genes. So the hard thing, people would misconfuse that, your genetics determine all sorts of things. Yes, they do. But for cell types, genes are not always active. They can be switched on and switched off. And that produces certain proteins or not, which control the way that cell develops.
Okay.
So the genes that are switched on in your bone cells are significantly different from muscle cells. for example.
So you're saying that so the DNA has got all the sort of genetic code in it in a sense, and there's certain on and off switches for certain things, and when certain things are on or off, it obviously makes something. Obviously, if every single thing was on, it would make some weird globby mess of everything. But you have to have, you have to have this thing to make the structure of this bone, and then this thing to make the bone marrow, and then it kind of like
exactly.
Okay.
Like
it's like ingredients.
Your
almost.
bone marrow is different from the actual physical bone construct.
So it's almost like these loads and loads of on and off switches for each of these cells make. It's almost like the ingredient to make a cell in a sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So the genes that are involved with the cell cycle are, funny enough, as we just mentioned, oncogenes.
Okay.
Which will end up producing the proteins that make the cell cycle continue. So which make the cell reproduce or replicate is probably the better term. And then there are called tumor suppressor genes, which halt the cycle. And with these, it controls the progress of the cycle, how fast it happens, and all that sort of thing. Cancer is essentially a mutation caused by any number of things, including just random errors in cell replication, that cause a damage or an error to happen in an oncogene or a tumor suppressor gene. And this is probably a very simplified version of the events, essentially.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we're not going into the deep, all the different variations and everything. We're just grazing the surface sort of thing.
But so if an oncogene is damaged, it might mean that it's always on, so the cell cycle never stops. If the tumor suppressor gene is damaged, it may mean that the genes can never be turned on. Right. So then there's no tumor suppressor gene activating to halt the cell cycle. Right. In both instances, it just means the cell cycle continues over and over and over and over again without the mechanism for it to stop being in place.
I see.
And that creates the uncontrolled growth of cells.
Yeah, okay. So it's kind of like, I'm trying to think of like, a good analogy would be just someone is just baking loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of food just constantly. And then at some point you go, okay, we've ran out of space in here. Hold up for a bit. We'll let everyone eat this or get rid of it or sell it or whatever. Then you can make some more when you're ready. And instead, it's like someone just constantly making it. And then the house is getting filled up with all this food. And then it's like spilling out everywhere. And it's like there's no way to turn it off. There's no stop switch. So
it's like if you're running a bath or something.
Yeah.
And you turn the thing on and then the thing of the tap comes off.
Oh, yeah. And then
it's just overflowing and you can't stop it. Like it just doesn't stop. You can't stop it because the handle's gone.
Yeah, that's a much better analogy. Yeah, good.
And this is where I feel the misconception is. There are the ways that we treat cancer involve radiotherapy, which is bombarding that area with radiation to try and kill off those particular cells.
But obviously, the side effect is it kills all cells.
Yeah, which is why when radiotherapy is something entirely different. Radiotherapy is that they'll normally have you, say, on the not operating table, like an X-ray table sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they'll have that source of radiation that they're bombarding with, but it will rotate and go around you so that the target area is receiving like the full dose of radiation, but everything around that is receiving a much reduced version because it's getting small exposure and then it's moving away.
Yeah, and obviously
so they focus the treatment on that area and everywhere else does still get exposed, but to a much lesser extent.
Right.
To minimise risk.
And you're going to say about chemotherapy now?
Chemotherapy is a chemical version of this, and it pretty much involves flooding the system with drugs that are meant to kill the cancer cells off. Because, if you think about the way that I've just described cancer is genetic mutations, every single person is different in terms of their genetics. And hence, even the genes that control the cell cycle in an individual person, you might have one or two tiny bits of the code that are different. And that doesn't produce any different effect normally, but it means that if a mutation happens, like that person's genetic code is different.
So some people react differently to, say, radiotherapy, even if they don't seem like...
I wouldn't say go that far. I would more say that because of the nature of what cancer is, it is your own body, which is why your immune system doesn't pick it up. It's not an infectious disease. It's not caused by something invading your body.
Yeah.
It is your body going wrong.
Yeah, it's not an enemy coming in attacking you. It's your actual insides going wrong. Yeah.
So, in that essence, because every cancer is that person's own cells, every cancer is different. That can be different because of their genetics. It could be different because the mutation's in a different place or in a different code. It's mutated in a different way. Don't hold me to this, but I would go as far as to say that every single instance of cancer is unique to its own situation.
Yeah. However, obviously, it may be unique, but 99.9% of it is the same as the other person. So that's the thing they can treat.
That obviously becomes complicated in terms of trying to specify treatment. And we have good treatments for some cancers and pretty much no treatment for others because of the mechanisms that they work and the way we understand them.
Yeah, I know that breast cancer, for example, is one of the ones which is very common. It's very horrendous when people get it, but it's one of the most curable ones. Whereas the most deadly ones are normally a lot of the time the ones of the internal organs, such as like my dad had esophageal cancer or stomach cancer,
pancreatic cancer, all that sort of thing. I think I'm not sure of statistics or anything, but I believe in terms of lethality, things like bowel cancer and anything to do with the digestive system tend to be the worst offenders for death, for mortality rates.
It's also part of it is not to horrendously delve into cancer once again, but it's like part of it is also, symptomatic. You can get stomach aches occasionally. If you've got a stomach, like my dad had, he was just occasionally got quite a bit of indigestion, a few stomach aches here and there, and it's just like, went to the doctors and they thought, oh, he's just got a bit of overactive digestive system or this or that, and it's like, when it's something like breast cancer, they say check for the tumour or check for a bump, and then it can be a tumour, makes treatment easier.
But in essence, what I want to say here is that because of the uniqueness of each cancer, finding effective drug treatments for things like that becomes incredibly difficult because each one could react differently, which is why radiotherapy is probably less effective than chemotherapy, I believe.
Yeah,
but it's much less potentially damaging to the patient.
From my experience, that is correct. Yeah, it's chemotherapy. I think you've described it before. I can't remember exactly how, but it's almost like chemotherapy is like attacking all the system at once.
Chemotherapy is probably the best way of describing it simply is the medical equivalent of a carpet bomb.
There you go. Yeah, that's what you've said to me in the past. Yeah, and it's just bombing everything and hoping the cancer's more damage than the person.
Yeah.
And obviously some people, unfortunately, they go through chemotherapy and it's the chemotherapy is the thing that kills them, unfortunately, or makes them so weak. But it's that sort of thing, which is why, obviously, with cancer, a lot of the time people say things like, oh, why can't people just cure cancer? It's like, because there's literally, not only is it obviously, as you've mentioned, at an individual level so different, but also what people don't get is breast cancer doesn't work necessarily in the same way that like blood cancer does, and bone
cancer or testicular.
They all work different. They all work differently because there's different cells that make them up. They're in different places. There's all kinds of different things that your body reacts to that cancer as well. And it's like,
and even within that type of cancer, they might still have differences that mean that one treatment may not work for one person, which is why they might go through cycles of different treatment to find the one that's working for them.
Exactly, which is why not everyone can just have radiotherapy and they're fine.
Is the reason why our current most effective way of treating things like cancer is that medical carpet bomb, because it's like, okay, we can't like target this thing, so we just need to try and wipe it off, essentially. So, which the misconception, like, this is what I want to say, is that it links onto something else I want to talk about in terms of big pharma. It's like, oh, they have the cure for cancer, they just don't want to give it and sell it because they're making too much money out the other ways. And my point of view, it's very much, if they had a cure-all to cancer, we would know about it, because it would be worth so much more money than the current treatments.
Oh yeah,
that they would be selling it.
Well, you wouldn't get, if there was a cure for cancer, you'd never get rich and famous people dying of cancer like that. No. That you'd have these people who are like huge actors. There's people that obviously in the media that have died of cancer, unfortunately, in recent years and recent times, really, in the last few weeks and whatnot. And it's like, well, if there was this big pharma thing, you'd have all these millionaires and stuff somehow miraculously getting out of cancer and stuff, and then they wouldn't be able to keep that a big secret. And it's just like, there's a lot of stuff. there's a lot of conspiracy around Big Pharma, which I agree with a lot of the way they push down, like legalization of medical marijuana and all that sort of jazz. But it's not, they have every single answer and they're all literally evil trying to kill people. Like, it's not that black and white. So, yeah.
And that's the other thing I want to say, is that anecdotal evidence that people have for, this person had medical marijuana or had the cannabinoid oil, all that sort of thing.
CBD oil, that sort of thing. By the way, guys, Carla, on episode I think 4 of the podcast, Carla and I talk about CBD oil a lot because she has Crohn's disease. So if you're interested in CBD and the way that works, and we talk about that quite a lot. So yeah.
But the whole thing with that is, yes, there are cases where people have taken these and have come out fine. The cancer has shrunk or whatever. That's one person. Like, there's the difference between anecdotal evidence of, this worked for this one person, than an actual, like, large medical case study on using this to try and treat something and seeing, okay, so put this against a control, double blind, all that sort of thing.
I think
so
double
we know what's
blind
going on.
placebo control studies are the best
all
you can
that
do.
sort of thing. Yeah. So, which is what I'm going to come on to later as well, more Big Pharma stuff. But to put it simply, like, cancer is an uncontrolled growth of cells. It is specific, from as far as I understand, to the individual and the type, which is why it's so difficult to treat, let alone the actual logistics of treating a cancer that's potentially spreading throughout somebody's entire body. Which is why the most effective treatment we have for it is a medical equivalent of a carpet bomb. To like put it in like 1 or 2 sentences. Yeah,
it's easy. That's easy to understand. I think we've kind of got around that quite easily. Yeah. Good shout. So, do you want to move on to the next sort of misconception then?
So this I want to talk about. It's a bit of a more socio-political thing to it. But as I've mentioned, the thing about Big Pharma, in air quotes. I do not doubt that there are people that will be trying to make a lot of money out of selling drugs. There are people that have abused the system. There's something to do with something called, I believe, ADI, if you've heard of that.
Is that the AIDS?
No, it's basically people trying to produce a female form of Viagra.
Okay.
And trials on it said that it doesn't have the efficacy that you'd want from a drug for that reason. It has inherent risks, a lot, especially in terms of if you're taking this, like you would say, because of the way that a female's hormones work in terms of that nature compared to a male's with Viagra. You'd need to be on this sort of drug and hormone treatment, because Viagra is essentially, in a way, it's like some form of hormone thing as well as other chemicals and stuff that produce the response. In women, you'd need to have a more prolonged low dosage over time that deal with that. It was what's it called? I've forgotten the word. That is completely gone. But that's it, libido.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So to change that, that's what this whole thing is about, is libido. And the side effects, especially when ingested with alcohol, because you're taking this pill over a period of maybe like a few weeks to a month. Horrendous side effects with severe consequences. And it's terrible people trying to force it through the drug development system because it's sexist if you don't. At the expense of the risk of people's health. And I think that's disgusting. And there's the case of, I can't remember his name, but the guy that basically bought out the rights to the HIV drug.
That's what I was
and ramped up the price by like 1,000%. And it's like, and then he immediately got cut down for that. I think he later on got sued for something else entirely.
I think he's in a lot of trouble now. I don't know if he got prison time or something like that.
I can't remember.
But he got something to do with the law, got to him, and then some other company managed to get a hold of what he was doing. And,
That behaviour is disgusting.
100%.
But to say that the majority of people are doing that for personal profit, I think is misleading and disingenuous. A lot of the people that are developing drugs, the people that are doing the work, are the ones that are saying, I can make a difference if I make this drug.
Yeah, almost every person who's trying to cure any strain of cancer or anything like that isn't thinking, I'm going to make loads of money or I'm going to become super famous and awesome. It's like, no, that's not how it works. It's like you have to commit your entire life to trying to get this to work. And, how many people do we know who are scientists who actually have flat out cured something? You get like the guy who developed antibiotics, well, penicillin. He discovered penicillin essentially.
Yeah.
Which
I believe that's Alexander Fleming.
I was going to say, I think it's Fleming.
Fleming.
Yeah, I mean that's one, years and years and years ago. How many do we know now? Like, I can't. I'm not a science expert, but I can't really name any.
I always find it amusing. Penicillin, the thing that creates it, because antibiotics are all biologically made. And it amuses me that the fungus that produces penicillin, it sounds like a Harry Potter spell.
What is it?
Penicillium notatum.
Nice. That's good. That's good. I like that.
It's like penicillium notatum and your smallpox is gone.
That's brilliant.
But yeah, so the whole thing, like, yes, these people want to do well and do good with the things they're producing, but they still need to live. They need to be paid. The things that cost the money, you do need to turn a profit when you're producing these things.
Oh yeah,
because you need to pay for the patents, which are of a limited time, like 10 to 15 years normally.
Yeah.
You need to pay for the years of research going into it, the scientists that are doing that research, the production. There are so many costs that go into it, as well as the actual process for producing a drug involves production, lab testing. Unfortunately, for medicine, testing on animals, both non-ape and ape types.
Mice
so
and
you
rats
have
are
to
the most common ones.
you have to go with either two types of, I think it's two, at least one rodent, two types of non-rodent, and one ape.
Okay, right.
Something along those sort of lines. I don't know the specifics of it exactly, but you have to have some animal testing, unfortunately. Animal testing in the cosmetic industry is abhorrent, should not be necessary when we can have simply skin cultures.
Oh yeah, exactly.
But testing drugs against an entire biological system is an entirely different story. Yes, you have the issue of it's different biological systems and different animals will react differently, but we have some close anatomical equivalents. For example, pigs are somewhat similar.
Yeah, I think they're one of the closest
anatomically to us.
They're one of the closest,
which is why apes is one of the key things about testing drugs on.
Yeah.
It then it gets approved for stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, or clinical trials.
Yeah.
Which involve saying to people, and essentially recruiting people to say, we're testing this drug. It's been tested on these animals and looks safe. Sign this waiver, and we can test it on you.
And often they have to pay them as well a lot of the time.
And things like the stage 2 or stage 3, you end up with the double-blind case study. So you have a control, which is the placebo, you have a control which is no treatment. You have the placebo, which is treatment, but it's essentially a blank treatment.
Yeah, so people just think they're getting
so
treated.
you have people that are not receiving anything, people that are receiving a false treatment but don't know it, and people that are receiving the actual treatment and don't know it. And this could be a mix of people that actually have the condition and don't, to see the effects of it on people that don't, for side effects and things.
Yeah, because that's one thing people don't think about is, like, when you get medicine for something, if you take medicine when you don't have that thing, because you get some people hypochondriacs or potentially misdiagnosed, you have to be prepared to also think about, okay, if someone doesn't have, make it really simple, the common cold, and they take some cold medicine, if that is really horrendous for your system, it's trying to attack something that isn't there, that could be worse than the cure. So it has to be so many things people don't really think about when it comes to medicine.
And by double blind, it means that all the people in the study do not know what they're receiving, apart from the people that are obviously not receiving the treatment. And the people that are administering the treatment also do not know what each person has been taking,
so there's no bias
until after the data has been collected.
Yeah, so they basically they don't have it so that they see this is the drug effects or whatever it is, they go, this is drug A, this is drug B, this is drug C. Drug C, no one actually realises that drug C is the placebo, but it's like, it's so that there's no biases, there's no one's agendas, there's no, like that eradicates the chance of someone, this whole conspiracy thing about Big Pharma, someone can't be paid by Big Pharma if they're doing a double blind because they can't change the results because they don't know what any of the results are until right at the very end. And by then, it's much...
And then you have to release the journals and studies say, look, this drug functions.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have the data to provide it, saying that, okay, this was our control group. They had no treatment, and this happened.
Yeah.
After the study, this control group that had the placebo, this happened.
Yeah.
And that may be an improvement from the other group.
Yeah.
What you're looking for is that the improvement from the control group of the actual drug is much greater than the one that had the placebo.
Yeah, exactly.
Because then you prove that that drug has efficacy more than the placebo does.
Yeah, because what a lot of people don't actually realise is obviously there's the term the placebo effect, and there's another term which is, I think it's called the nocebo effect, something similar to that, which I heard about in another podcast.
I've not heard of that before.
It's
maybe it's more of a colloquialism.
Yeah, I don't think it's like it's not like a specific thing, but it's like a general term, and it's like if you give people a drug and tell them it's going to work, there's certain cases, there's times where it does actually work, like actually cures them essentially because they think they're being cured, so their body essentially does that work. But there's also one which is if you give people the right drug medicine and they think it's not going to work or they think it's not the right one, there's been studies that actually show
the opposite effect of the placebo.
So
okay, I get what you mean.
Yeah, so you give them the right drug that should cure it, but because they think it's the wrong drug or they think it's not going to cure it, they then somehow their body almost rejects it or does this or does that. I don't know enough about it, unfortunately, but it basically means that it doesn't work. So that's why you have to do these double blind of not only the people taking the drugs, but as well as the people administering it for all these sorts of causations. And a lot of people don't realise this when it comes to medicine and things, which is obviously why you want to bring up the misconception of Big Pharma having every answer. It's like we also are in the age of the internet, and it's becoming harder and harder to hide things.
Yeah.
And something as massive as cancer, like. How many people does anyone know that you could actually pay them enough money to tell them to not give cancer out to anyone they know who, everyone knows someone who's got cancer, unfortunately, whether it's your grandma, whether it's your friend's grandma, it's everywhere, unfortunately. There's only a small handful of people, probably 0.001%. They'd have to be complete psychopaths to actually know.
You have to practically be inhuman to say, no, I'm not going to give this effective treatment out to people that need it to survive.
And also not even say anything, like no whistleblowers.
Yeah.
Like apparently there's no whistle. Apparently there's this big conspiracy about it, but there's not a single whistleblower about it. It's like there would be one. You know what I mean? So yeah. Is there anything else you want to add about the pharma or the medicine?
Yeah, I mean it is different by country. I definitely believe it has more of an influence over in America.
Yes.
Where their medical system is insurance based. It is, unfortunately, as far as I can tell, much more profit driven.
Yeah, they have a lot more
even
branding.
At the hospital level of, oh well, here you've taken treatment, here's a bill.
Yeah.
And people have opt out of treatment because they can't afford it, and I think that's abhorrent. I think that's...
Oh yeah, the whole medical system in America is one of the worst things in the whole planet. They've got some of the worst drug abuses things over there because people get addicted to pain meds and then can't afford them, so then they buy street heroin just to crave when they go cold turkey off things. There could be an entire podcast literally just talking about healthcare systems and stuff.
It wouldn't surprise me if opioid painkillers are probably one of the biggest addiction levels in anywhere.
In America, it's in fact in America now it's actually the number one cause of death is drug overdose. A lot of it.
That's depressing.
Yeah, a lot of it to do with pharmaceuticals, because also another part of it, what people don't think about, is in America there's adverts for antidepressants.
That sounds like a really good idea.
And it's you have these people on TV who are all sad and depressed. Do you sometimes feel disassociated with people? Do you sometimes get angry at people that you can't figure out why? Do you go for weeks sometimes where you don't really laugh? You may have depression. Talk to your doctor about blah 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 today.
That's why it infuriates me so much that it's marketed and profiteered, and it is because in certain places it is healthcare is run like a business.
Oh yeah,
and compared to here with the NHS, yes, there are issues with the NHS. Don't get me wrong.
Oh god, yeah, it's a very flawed system.
One thing that everyone could do to help is say, instead of saying, "Oh, I feel a bit ill," go to your GP and they prescribe you some painkillers. that cost the NHS to actually prescribe and do that, like however much money. Just go to your corner shop and buy a pack of paracetamol or something. Of course, if you're allergic to paracetamol, saying don't do that.
Yeah.
But go to your local corner shop. You can probably pick up a pack of paracetamol or decongestants or anything like that for under £1.
Oh yeah.
And that saves you money. It saves the system money, and everyone's better off for it.
Yeah, and there's another thing, obviously, with self-diagnoses as well, which is you can do a degree of it using certain things online, as long as you cross-reference, don't just look at one website and take your... But there's loads of NHS stuff as well.
Google any symptoms you have. Like, I'm healthy and normal, I'm not ill. I'm going to Google, like, oh, I have a sniffling nose. Death.
Yeah, but there's
you have a week to live.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, there's loads of resources you can use, so take things with a pinch of salt, but also a lot of people don't realise, this is a minor tangent, is just... A lot of the time people feel ill, feel crap, feel this, feel that, whether it's mental illness and feeling depressed or physical conditions or anything like that. A lot of the time it's due to lifestyle. Like if you're eating shit all the time, you're just eating junk food, you do no exercise whatsoever, you're drinking cans of Coca-Cola every day, you never drink any water and you don't eat fruit or veg, and you feel rubbish and you get stomach cramps or you can't sleep or you can't do this, you can't do that. It's like, don't go to the doctor and get them to prescribe you pain meds or sleeping meds or antidepressants first. That shouldn't be the first port of call. That should be, you've tried changing your lifestyle, you've tried looking up things online, figuring out forums are a great thing. The internet is an absolute blessing. You know, don't take everything you see on the internet as gospel, but take things with a pinch of salt, cross-reference, use the appropriate resources. If you go on the NHS website, it's 9 times out of 10 it's going to be completely fine, you know, but it's all about people taking care of themselves and not abusing the system.
Like, I feel a bit fluey. Best pop off to A&E. Just please don't. No.
You're going to kill us all.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole big pharma thing. In different places, it is definitely more of a thing, more of a significant player. But I don't feel that anyone in actively participating in the profession, either as doctors or nurses or the people that are researching these drugs, have ill intent towards profit. It is the sponsors and the funders that are the ones that are going to be profiteering off of it.
Well, the problem is also in America, for example, when you have the things where you have doctors and they get taken out for dinner from the certain drug company and they go, you know, these antidepressants, if you give these antidepressants, they're a bit better. Like, a lot of the time the doctors, they don't have time to look through all the research notes or everything like that, and it's just like, okay, well, I have to give out a certain amount of antidepressants on paper and study-wise. Both of these look exactly the same, but this person's paying me for, so I'm going to use that one. And I'm not saying that's morally right, but they're not actually evil. But also you've got to think of, if doctors were getting paid more, they wouldn't have to take money under the table. All these sorts of... Everything is a much bigger issue than people like to think. People like to think, especially with a lot of conspiracy theories...
Well, not necessarily bigger, but much more
complicated. Yeah, it's like there's not just... It's not black and white. Oh, Big Pharma have got cancer cured and they're drip feeding us it just to slowly kill the population and stuff. It's like, no, that's a disgustingly gross oversimplification of a subject which is so complicated. Even when you come down to, like, when I said about medicinal marijuana in America and things like that, it's like... There have been things looking into showing that Big Pharma, in quotes, have paid people and lobbyists to try and quiet some of the studies that come out showing the benefits of medical marijuana due to them having interest in selling loads of these other drugs for joint pain and that sort of thing. However, that's a much bigger topic to discuss at a completely another time. But even if those things are happening to a degree, they're not happening across the board everywhere in the world. 100% Big Pharma have got a cure for cancer. Like, it's a lot more complex than that sort of issue.
Yeah. So to cut this one into a couple of sentences, yes, drugs are sold to make money, but they need to because patents are expensive.
Yep.
You need to pay people for sometimes upwards of 10 years of development and research to actually produce these drugs.
And there's specialists with degrees, etc.
Yeah. These people are at minimum looking for probably at least £30,000 a year to be able to, like, for this specialist level of doing stuff. But you're looking at like biomedical, biochemists, all that sort of thing, like high level specialist people
with all the equipment, etc., etc.
Like the running costs, everything. Drug development is by its nature expensive, and they need to get the money back to pay that off from somewhere. So yes, even in our case for the NHS, like the NHS will buy medicines off somewhere, but they do that at like, the reasonable prices that they can find, that people are selling to at fair prices. It's regulated, all that sort of thing. Over here, yes, regulation. Over in America, probably not so much.
Yeah. And one last tiny thing I'll add when it comes to just generally companies making money. Obviously, there's a lot of companies in the world that make way too much money and don't give enough back to the communities and the country and tax evasion, blah, blah, blah. But one thing people don't realise when people get angry about certain companies making profit is, one thing I learned where I worked in a small business for quite a while was that a lot of the time, the profit that the companies made, you think, oh, the profit is going into the debt reductor's pocket. 9 times out of 10, the profit is going into either expanding the business or putting a pool of money in, because then if something really bad goes wrong, like, for example, with drug testing, if you test a drug for 10 years and you think it's going to go places, then at the last hurdle you realise, oh, crap, it's actually not good at all, it's horrendous. You've then spent all this money to get somewhere which isn't going to go anywhere, and you have to start again, or there can be other issues with it, such as lawsuits.
That is exactly the case. Yeah. Like, you can go from all the previous development stages, get to double-blind stage 2 trial, and no efficacy. It's basically the same as the control. And it's
exactly.
Like, well, we've got to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah,
like,
and that could take
they have the evidence to say that they can produce something that works, but it hasn't worked this time. Go back, find a new iteration. Like, it could be as simple as changing the orientation of something around a benzene ring, which that is a whole nother kettle of chemistry fish.
Yeah, I don't even understand that.
But it, like, a molecule is structured in a certain way.
Yeah.
If, for example, a benzene ring is a ring of 6 carbons linked up together,
yep,
and things can like be off of those positions. So if something is put in one position, and then you say, okay, it's not working there, so let's put it on this position,
I see.
That can have an entirely different effect.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it's also reshuffling it.
Reshuffling the structure of the molecule of the compound or drug or whatever could be the solution.
Yeah.
And you have to go back to the drawing board to chemically synthesize that and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So is there... I think there was at least one other thing I know that you wanted to discuss.
Do we have time for it?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we're at about the 40-minute mark, so we're doing quite well, about 20-ish minutes per segment. So I think the last one was GMO, wasn't it?
I want to talk a bit about the genetic modification, and both in ways that we use it more medically as well as in food and everything like that. Because that is a controversial topic, and there is no... I'll say in advance, there is no like right answer. It more or less, as far as I'm aware, still comes down to personal choice sort of thing. Everything, if the food is GMO, I think it is like by law labelled as such on the packaging.
And that's genetically modified.
GMO is genetically modified organism.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
And essentially, the people have like, oh, it's GMO. It's done in a lab. It's bad.
It's like got a mutated tomato with like legs and shit.
It's like like square tomatoes or something. Like,
that'd be awesome. I'd love to.
Which is like, it's like, oh yeah, let's GMO create GMO tomatoes that are square so we can slice them and fit them nice and neatly in our sandwiches.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
And it's
I'd be down for that.
Okay, one, is that even possible to do with genetics?
We need to do it, Josh.
Two,
we need to fund it.
Is that a worthwhile use of our time?
Yes, it is. Triangle tomatoes, mate. Then you can have sandwiches, you can have square tomatoes, you can have triangle ones. Cut out the business, bro. You can do it.
Octagonal tomatoes.
Oh, Lord.
Basically, as humans, through agriculture and crops and livestock, we have been artificially manipulating genes
Selective breeding?
since domestication happened.
Right.
Selective breeding, what you said, is exactly that. You're saying this thing has these traits that I like, and this thing also has these traits that I like. So I'm going to breed them together so that the offspring has these traits.
So the most common thing for that is obviously dogs. That's probably the easiest way for people to understand. When it comes to animals and stuff, for example, a lot of people don't realise this. I think I mentioned in the podcast before. Dogs, every species of dog comes from wolves. Like wolves, dogs, and coyotes all come from the same pot. They're basically the same animal. They can all mate together. So a Chihuahua came from a wolf, but from selective breeding.
A Chihuahua can mate with a St. Bernard.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
And it's
the
like because
two complete polar opposites of dogs.
yeah, because a Chihuahua is basically almost like you breed.
Yeah.
Because obviously you can think of like a good dog that's like a wolf is like a husky. Okay, so you can almost think of it as a husky is the closest thing to to a wolf. And it's like, well, the runt of the litter of the husky with like a beigeish fur or whatever. You then get the runt of the litter to mate with another runt of the litter, and then you get a slightly smaller husky, and then you keep doing that over years and years and years. I mean, you got
generations and generations.
Well,
and you end up improving on. It's called. It's selective breeding, but it's what in terms it's artificial selection, where you have natural selection, which is the environment determines what traits are useful, and then the people with the organisms with those traits live on to reproduce.
Yeah.
The other ones might die off.
Yeah.
Or in terms of sexual selection, this one is preferred by the mate, so then they reproduce, and that it creates the self-perpetuating. Okay. So the taller ones are more suited to the environment, so they survive to reproduce. So they have taller offspring, and then they produce, and the taller ones survive, and they produce even taller offspring, which is how you might go from a horse to a giraffe.
Yeah.
Because while they have, the environment is selecting for horses with longer neck length.
Yeah, one of the things, I wrote it down actually. One of the things I'd love to go into with you at some point, not obviously now, is evolution and that sort of thing. We can get make evolution a lot more simple and things like that. That'd be great. But yeah, so continue. Sorry. With
so in terms of GMO, what we're doing is we're taking, say, okay, I want these genes and I want it to do this. Instead of going from individuals and breeding for generations on generations on generations, we're taking the egg cell or the embryo, whatever you want to say, and we're saying, okay, let's pop the DNA out, change it a little bit to what we want, pop it back in, and let that grow. So instead of the generations of selective breeding, we just say, okay, let's do it in one.
Yeah.
Yes, that involves doing it in a lab, but what's the deal? You're doing exactly the same thing, just cutting out the middleman.
Yeah, you're saving time essentially.
Yeah.
It's just making
and money and resources of rearing these generations of cows or pigs or plants or something like that.
One example that I believe has actually happened that a lot of people don't realise is oranges. And I think it was, if you tasted a natural orange a couple hundred years ago, it would taste nothing like an orange. It essentially tastes like crap. But what's happened is because when you have real sweet and tangy oranges, obviously when humans started agriculture and cultivating oranges without understanding about selective breeding or anything like that, they would have a tree that makes really sweet oranges and have a tree that makes really not sweet oranges or bitter oranges, for example. When you eat the bitter oranges, you don't like them, so you just get rid of all those oranges, and when you have all the sweet tangy ones, you go, oh man, these sweet ones are great, let's plant more of these orange trees, and then over that little area more and more oranges are sweet, and then that eventually happens. Obviously it's not unanimously worldwide completely, but over time, hundreds of years of agriculture, if not thousands, eventually all the oranges in the world are the ones that taste sweet, because if humans are in a lot of control of that, no humans want to eat horrendously bitter oranges, they want to eat the sweet ones. And that's how we've kind of done it in one way, and oranges are one of the ones I'm aware of.
So it's cutting out the middleman, choosing the genes we want within the same species.
Yeah.
There is instances of we use it in between species. So for example, carrots are a good source of vitamin A. They produce a lot of vitamin A, which we require in our diets. There was a time over in Asia, I believe it was India, there was a very, very high infant mortality rate due to vitamin A deficiency.
Okay.
So they produced a plant by taking what's readily available across the vast majority of Asia. Rice.
I was thinking rice, but I didn't want to say it because I thought it was going to be wrong. Okay.
And they say, okay, rice is amazingly abundant, but it doesn't have any vitamin A.
Right.
So let's say take the gene that produces a protein that is vitamin A, because this links back to the gene switching on and off thing about a gene, your DNA, all it does is code for a protein.
Yeah.
So you take the code that equals this protein and you put it in the rice.
Yes.
That rice now, as well as doing everything it did before, completely normally, unchanged, it now also produces vitamin A.
There's one little, essentially, real simplified way of looking at it, guys, is just there's one little on-off switch, which was off in the rice and on in something else. You kind of pop it in there, flick it on. It
wasn't off, it wasn't there.
It wasn't there at all.
No.
Okay, so you add this additional thing, so it
So
doesn't change anything else.
It's like you
literally
got a piece of string
Yep.
from end to end that's the DNA of the rice.
Yep.
You cut it in the middle.
Yep.
Open it out. So you got white string for the rice.
Mm-hmm.
And you got the orange string for the carrot.
Mm-hmm.
You cut the bit out of the carrot's orange string that equals the vitamin A.
Yep.
And you tie it onto the ends that you've just cut
Mm-hmm.
of the rice and snip it in.
Yep.
So you have a slightly longer piece of string with an orange bit in the middle.
Yep.
For the vitamin A.
And the white parts, which are the rice, they're still intact. They're still the same.
All you've done is snip it in the middle.
Yep.
Pop the vitamin A in.
Yep.
Sew it back all together again.
And there you go.
And you're done.
That's a real good way of describing it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And that then it's like, okay, well now in Asia, it spread rapidly. It was produced by, I believe, it's funny, it's called IRI, the International Rice Research Institute, which is an actual thing.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And it was called, I believe, Miracle Rice, or IR8.
Okay.
That, because of how well it was adopted, it comes with a load of things in terms of it's a monoculture, it's single species, everything's very similar, so you end up with problems with the potential of pests and diseases wiping out the entire population.
Oh, okay, I see.
Which is like the reason why banana flavored things now do not taste like bananas is because the bananas we eat are a different subspecies than the one that we extracted the formula for the flavoring out of.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. It was a type
And
of banana that got
there
extinct in the 30s. I think.
Loads of monocultures, disease hit, wiped out the entire subspecies. So those bananas are now actually extinct.
Yeah, so just to clarify, everyone, when people taste things that is like banana flavored, like milkshake is a good one, they don't taste like bananas because they did taste like bananas, but those bananas don't really exist on Earth anymore.
They don't. They're extinct.
Yeah, they got wiped out because obviously, yeah, when you have, as you say, a monoculture, one way I describe it, a kind of easy way of thinking about it is, or for me personally, is when you have two parents of a child, for example, if they're both really, really susceptible to the flu, and then they have a kid that's susceptible to the flu comes in, wipes all three of them out.
Yep.
That's not helpful with survival or evolution anyway, shape or form. So,
and that's where more GMO comes in, because you can say, okay, well, this plant is resistant to that disease, or resistant to that pest, or resistant to drought, or resistant to heavy, like, waterlogged soil.
yes.
And you say, okay, this means you take those genes, you pop it in, and it can now deal with those conditions. And you do that to improve it until you get like the super plant that can do all that stuff.
When they do that, though, just clarify, when they did that, or when they do sort of GMO, it's not like we'll do it, make one, plant it in a garden somewhere, leave it to stew, and it'll take over the world. It's like they do extensive testing on it, don't they?
So yeah, there is no substantial evidence for a lot of things in terms of GMOs to say, oh, people have just come out and say, oh, well, GMOs increase your risk of cancer. It's like, and where is your evidence to support that? Like, where exactly have you found this evidence?
Yeah, so why a GMO tomato and my granddad
However,
got cancer?
in terms of the environmental impacts, there are legitimate, serious concerns, like especially with plants that, for example, are wind pollinators. If they have this species of rice, have these genes, and the pollen goes over and pollinates a different kind of rice, and they crossbreed, and then produce a new variety of rice with these inherent benefits that the GM rice has, you might get a wild strain of the plant that is a super plant and can start running rampant and taking over because it doesn't have the natural controls on it anymore.
Yes, I see, yeah.
So that is a legitimate concern, and you can put controls in place for that. Especially, that's very easy to do in terms of like animals and livestock. It's a bit more difficult with plants, especially wind pollinators.
Yeah.
But in essence, like, people think, oh, you're putting all these bits and bobs into these plants, but you're not. You're taking one specific thing that you need and putting that one specific thing in the thing that already exists.
Yeah. Like,
you're not like making some
Franken
chimera of plants and animals and stuff. Like, it's not like that bloody Girl and the Dog in Full Metal Alchemist.
Oh God.
It's not that. To bring that up. But like that is the essence of what you're doing. And that has also proved to be, I mean, another thing to say, like, a plant produces fruits. Fruit is there to help spread the seeds. bananas, yes, they're a herb, but they're also the fruit of the plant.
Mm-hmm.
Grapes are fruit. How do you think we get seedless bananas and seedless grapes? Because you take out the genetics that produce the seeds.
I always wondered about that with seedless grapes. Huh. So, yeah,
Because
obviously...
you can have seedless grapes, but you can't grow more grapes from them because there's no seeds.
Mm.
So you need to be like actively doing these things to produce the seeds that grow seedless grapes.
Yeah, I see. That makes sense.
Or bananas, or etc., etc.
Yeah, that will make sense.
But GM stuff has, in the same way, been very useful medically.
Yeah.
Because, for example, before we had the means to, if someone's diabetic now, the insulin they inject is, I say they're type 1 diabetic, the insulin they inject is human insulin.
Mm-hmm.
Before, we had no means of getting human insulin unless it was out of a person, which they wouldn't do because obviously we're important because we're people. So they would use porcine insulin, pig insulin, because of their anatomical similarity.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure you've probably also heard, I'm pretty sure there's successful cases, they have to go through the same drug treatments and everything that other people do that have human components. But I'm sure there have been cases of some people surviving a organ transplant of a pig heart.
That I'm pretty damn certain that's happened.
Yeah.
I'm 99% sure that I've heard of at least one case of that happening.
Like that's how similar anatomically pigs are to us.
Yeah.
And insulin might be ever so slightly different, but you can have pig insulin and it will function pretty much the same way in a human. Of course, there's every chance of potential allergic reactions and all that sort of thing because it is a foreign.
It's just much
molecule and all
safer.
that sort of
It's
thing.
just much safer for it to be human insulin.
And what we do is say, okay, well, this is the gene in humans that produces the protein insulin.
Mm-hmm.
So we take the gene, we snip it out, and we put it in some bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
And the way bacteria have their DNA is different to people. They have circular DNA rather than strands.
Right.
And they also have they have their main DNA, and they have little mini ringlets that are around dotted over the place called plasmids.
Oh, Christ.
So you put the DNA for insulin into the plasmid. That bacteria now, as well as doing all the other things that it does, much like the plants that you're saying, okay, the rice did everything it normally did and produces vitamin A.
Right.
The bacteria does everything it normally did. I think it's E. coli they use, actually. And it also now produces human insulin as a byproduct of just existing.
I see. Yep. Okay.
So then you have these amounts of bacteria cultured, and you're just producing human insulin that you can siphon off and package up and use for humans with diabetes because they don't produce insulin.
That's brilliant. Well, we're getting close to the hour mark now, and very close to it, in fact. So we'll start to wrap up a little bit. So if you want to say, I was going to say one little thing to do with GMOs as well is that people just like to attack things they don't fully understand a lot,
and jump on bandwagons.
Exactly, which is what this whole theme of this podcast has been. And here's one of my my little fleeting thoughts, essentially, which is like, you know, with the discussion of stem cell burgers, but burgers being grown in a lab grown meat, all that sort of jazz.
Oh yeah, I actually had a conversation about this with someone today.
That's really interesting.
Vegan, nonetheless.
Oh wow, cool. Well, I'm not going to delve deep into that because that's a whole nother kettle of fish. But with people getting a bit worried about that sort of thing, and also with GMOs. Okay, here's an example of you need to look into things first. Okay, before humans got freezers, we used to go get ice from places that were frozen, you know, and they used to bring that back as ice.
Before we had freezers, people didn't do weekly shops. They bought on like a daily or whatever other daily basis. They just didn't store food in the home.
Precisely. But when they wanted ice or anything like that, and they got bags of ice from whatever, that sort of thing, it was quote unquote natural ice. When freezers were first a thing, there were people actually lobbying and trying to convince others that ice frozen in a freezer was unnatural. It's the same exact thing. It's done in the exact same way.
Solid water, or there's naturally solid water, or water that you've made solid in a box.
Naturally. It's like, so
okay.
So we just want to say, don't don't jump on bandwagons. Don't just assume things are right. I mean, even with this podcast, for example, don't necessarily listen to everything we've said without researching it. If you want, go delve deep. We understand that not everyone has got time to every bit of information you hear. People go to work, they've got a lot of stuff to think about, and anyone listening to this, I really appreciate it. And I'm not saying you should then spend 3 hours researching into everything that Josh says, because I trust Josh. But if you do, that's a good thing. It shows that you don't believe everything you hear.
To put it in a sentence, to be good scientifically means to have a healthy level of skepticism. Not to say like, oh, I'm skeptical about that. No way. It's like to say, okay, look at this objectively. Evidence. You can't really see facial expressions, but it's like a
Ponder.
Ponder. Like, not judge, but look at things and say, okay, critically evaluate what you're looking at.
Yeah, precisely.
Does it have substantial evidence? Things like that.
And do that with everything and everyone. Don't think you know everything, but don't think that they know nothing. It's all about balance. That's all it comes down to. With everything, conspiracy theories are the same thing. Don't believe everything that everyone tells you all the time, but don't equally think everything is being told to you is a lie. Whether it's GMOs or anything else.
Some people might come up with outrageous claims, and you say, okay, and then think, let's go look this up and do some research.
Let's find the evidence
and then see where this evidence is coming from, because is it a reputable source, and that sort of thing.
Precisely. Yeah, I totally agree. Right, I think that about wraps it up. Thank you once again for coming on, Josh, for another episode.
I feel these are more me talking than you.
Well, the thing is, it's my podcast, so people listen to me talk. If they
way too much.
Well, exactly. What? Yeah. If they listen to all the podcasts, they hear my voice far too much, and I talk about way too many things I don't know about. So I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm sure the next episode, we've got a few notes written down, will be very enthralling. So thanks again, Josh.
Yes, thank you.
And that's the end of another episode. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. As I said at the start, there are 2 more episodes of Science But Simple on the Genuine Chit-Chat podcast, episode 6 and episode 12. So yeah, be sure to check those out. I think I'll probably put links in the descriptions to make sure you can check that out. Check out last week's episode, which was, as I said at the start, with my buddy Wayne about paleontology, so that's a great one as well. And then for the future, I've got a few that I'm recording. In this week, I'm recording 3, which I'm hoping will be 2-ish hour-long ones. I'll be recording more Science But Simple ones of Josh, but I try and release them sort of intermittently, so we're just not just seeming like a purely scientific podcast. I think there's going to be one which can be about men versus women in a sense, which I'm going to be talking with a woman about this sort of thing. Some of them almost misconceptions that men have about women and vice versa, that sort of thing. So that could be a really interesting conversation. Another conversation with a friend of mine who's from Poland. So that might be really cool. As I said, I haven't recorded these yet. I'm actually recording these intros on Friday, and I normally release the episodes on Sunday. And I think I'm recording the other 2 episodes actually on Saturday and Sunday. So, and then I've got another friend of mine next week for Wednesday that I've planned. I've got a recording with him. He's a super smart guy as well. I don't know what we'll be chatting about. So it's quite a bit of variety. There's a couple of people I'm going to talk about care work. There's a friend of mine who does theatrical production, Alex Hart, who's been on the movie or to the movie podcasts that I've done. We'll be talking about the sort of things he's been getting up to in Wales, because he's like a super outdoorsy sort of person. So the next month or 2, I've got quite a few things lined up, all of which I hope will be really interesting for you guys. As I always say, I really appreciate anyone listening to this and giving it a go and sharing it, rating it, anything like that. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can email us at genuinechitchat@outlook.com. All the links are in the description. Find us on YouTube, Stitcher, Podbean, really any of those sorts of things. Any feedback is welcomed, positive or negative. And yeah, I hope you all guys all have a great week, have a great day, and I suppose I'll talk to you next week.